We are recording now, and then this will be found in the resources section in our circle community. But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to introduce you to everyone so that they know who you are. This is Cheryl Anthony, and she is actually a native, I believe, of Oregon, and now she lives in Sahuarita, Arizona. She's the president of Southern Arizona Educational Services, and she provides assessments and direct services for those with dyslexia. And she's been doing this, I believe, for at least 20 years or more. She helps coordinate IEP services through contracts with schools and provides teacher and parent training as well. And we're just really excited to have you come. I think you also recently published a book, so hopefully you'll tell us a little bit about that. And I believe it has to do with providing decodable books. So hopefully you'll fill us in at the end of the presentation about that. So we're really excited to learn a little bit more about dyslexia, and we're just super happy to have you on. I know I've learned a lot from you in the little interaction that we've had. So I just couldn't, it's always hard to talk about yourself. So I thought I'd just give you a little intro there, Cheryl. And then I can start the slides if you would like me to.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm really glad to be able to spend time with all of you that have chosen to spend your time with me, and any that might listen to this a little bit later. I do believe this will be well worth your time. And I'll have you go ahead and kind of click through that. I do operate Southern Arizona Educational Services here in Green Valley and Sahuarita, and you've already talked a little bit about a lot of the things that I do, but I'm very passionate about helping students, younger children, even through adults who have been struggling with reading, writing, spelling, time management. Sometimes that comes into the picture too. And then providing some assessments. And we'll get to talking, I think, about assessments a little bit later in this presentation. So thank you. I want to make the very best use of our time today. And I do use a system that's based on Orton Gillingham. Some of you may have heard of that type of intervention program, and have found it to be so very effective for so very many students. So let's dive in today, and let's go to the next slide. Today we're going to talk about what is dyslexia. You may have heard that term. We're going to dive into it a little bit more. Hopefully you'll learn a lot about that. What are the symptoms of dyslexia? And then how can I support my child's reading at home? I know a lot of times parents see reading struggles and they're not quite sure even where to start. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today too. So if we can go to the next slide. If you do have questions, please jot them down. If we don't have time at the end, or depending on how that looks at the end, you can always email them at the successful_LRNG for learning at yahoo.com. I will be happy to email you back or give you a call, whatever you prefer there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's dive in. So what are the most popular myths about dyslexia? Actually, I was just in a conversation with a lady that does provide support for children in this area, and we were talking about this very thing. What is dyslexia? And so a lot of people think, oh, that's where people see things backwards, like they'll see DAB for bad. They'll get the letters all mixed up, and people think that it's actually a vision problem, that they're seeing those things backwards. But dyslexia is not a vision problem. Also, people think, oh, my child isn't trying hard enough. If they would try a little bit harder, I think they would be successful. Or they see a student with a bad attitude and they think, well, that must be dyslexia. I see them writing, kind of having difficulty with that. Really? That's really kind of our first clues of something's different here. Something's not going on quite right. But it's not seeing things backward. It is a language processing difference. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's go to the next slide, please. Dyslexia actually affects much more than reading. If we could go back one slide. And we think about reading, well, that's going to impact someone's education, right? From the very beginning sometimes. Because dyslexia is a language processing difference, it can affect how someone speaks. So they may mix up the sounds and words. It can affect reading from the very beginning. Sometimes students get by for a little while and they can read, but when things get harder, the text gets harder and longer, things start falling apart for them. So sometimes people don't see it for a little while when a person has dyslexia, but it may show up when they're a little bit like third grade or so. What about health? And I've thought about this when I'm like, wow, if a person can't read and you get a prescription from your doctor and you're trying to figure out how much medicine should I take? Can I read recipes? Right? Can I read instructions from my doctor? It can impact a person's whole life. And then their career path. So people with dyslexia may be limited in the career paths that they would like to go into because of their academic difficulties. Some people are impacted in the area of math, not all, but some. And then spelling and writing can be a real challenge. So when we think about dyslexia, people might first see it with the reading or the writing, but it really can impact a person's entire life. Okay, so we definitely want to know more about this, right? Well, sometimes people think, well, just give it time, you'll outgrow it. You don't outgrow dyslexia. Dyslexia is a brain difference, and so it's there for the lifelong challenges that can manifest in numerous ways throughout the lifespan. We actually have a lot of very successful people who have dyslexia, and you may recognize some faces on this screen, from politics to actors to financial people, just all kinds of people. And there are various areas of strengths, a lot of entrepreneurs. So these are outside the box thinkers a lot of times, and they do have areas of strengths, areas of weakness in that reading, writing, sometimes math, but also areas of strengths. They can be great with just people skills, thinking outside the box, inventors. So there's a lot of there's a lot of things that are very positive about people with dyslexia in their areas of strengths, but sometimes they're not recognized for their strengths for a while. Okay, let's go on. So when I first started learning about dyslexia back in about 2003, it was one of the least talked about learning disabilities in the country. Even though, and this is kind of shocking, we had 28 centers around the country. They've been in existence for about 25 years that had replicated scientific research. We actually knew a lot about dyslexia in the research community, but that information just had not got into the educational and public sectors. There have been many of us working for a long time to change that picture, and things are definitely beginning to change. Okay, let's go ahead. So when we look at legislation regarding dyslexia and learning disabilities, back in 2014, House Bill 456 was passed in the House. And this was actually a bipartisan congressional dyslexia caucus that got this passed. And that legislation called on schools and state and local educational agencies to recognize that dyslexia has significant educational implications that must be addressed. I'm so glad that this legislation was passed. There is often a 1 in 5 initiative in May. And we're just looking at across the country here, we see a lot of states now in green. And I'm happy to say Oregon and Washington, where I came from, do have dyslexia legislation. And even more importantly, where we're at now, Arizona does have recent dyslexia legislation. And this year, 2022, 2023, there has been implementation in our schools to provide teachers and support staff with dyslexia training, and also dyslexia screeners are now in place in the schools. And just this last month, I believe, some recent reports have been given out to parents regarding what does my child's literacy progress look like? Do they have indicators for dyslexia? So we're looking at several different areas in a student's literacy acquisition to see, do they have the foundation in place or not? And that's what these screeners are really doing, is letting us know, both teachers and parents, are those foundations in place? Have students met the expectations that we hope that they will, so that we know literacy can proceed? So there's only one state, well, maybe 3 states that were really slow to implement this legislation. And I am happy to say Idaho just recently passed legislation to get some support in their state. So things are looking much better than they were when I first started on this journey. And it's pretty exciting to see. All right. So what is dyslexia? And this definition has been around since 2002. What is it really? Let's take a look. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component, the sound awareness component of language, that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And just be aware, this definition is what is used at the National Institutes of Health. It was adopted by the International Dyslexia Association back in 2002, so it's been around for quite some time. And then in Washington, where I'm actually from, I lived on the board of Oregon and Washington there, back in 2018 there, and in Oregon in 2016. And I did put Arizona 2022. It may have been a little bit earlier than that, but they are beginning to implement.
For some reason, Cheryl, you got frozen. So we can't hear you at the moment. Let's see. Oh. Thanks for your patience. Also, if you're listening and you have any questions, I'm writing them down. So at the end, she's going to do Q&A. So if there's any specific questions related to your kiddos or people that you know, you can always go ahead and put them in the chat. I have a few that I've collected from people who couldn't make it. So I will go ahead and ask those questions at the end. I'm going to go ahead and have her be a co-host again. There we go.
Okay.
We're back in.
Okay, very good. So sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened on my end, if something did or not. Could we go back once a slide? Let's see where we're at here. We may be okay. No, I think that is okay. Okay, so we were talking about the definition of dyslexia, and just quickly here, again, when we're thinking about what is dyslexia, we know it's a brain difference, a brain wiring difference. So not that someone has less intelligence because they're dyslexia. That's not what this is. It's really the wiring of the brain for language, how the brain is wired for language. And here we see the typical brain. There, and the 3 areas that are highlighted are what we found in research. When an individual reads and processes language, which areas of the brain are activated? And we see the typical brain, we've got three prominent areas: the Broca's area for articulation and word analysis, the parietal temporal for word analysis, and occipital temporal for word form. So typically when a non-dyslexic person reads and processes language, all three areas are activated. But the person with dyslexia, they have a less efficient brain wiring. They have some areas of strengths too, so I want to make sure I comment on that. But when they're processing language, they use really an inferior area. It doesn't get all of the information processed as well as a non-dyslexic person. So you can see just that one area is primarily activated when they process print. So it really is a brain difference. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So more about what is dyslexia. It is an inherited condition. It actually runs really strongly in family trees. And what I've learned over the years is that if one parent has dyslexia, about 50% of the children will also inherit that dyslexia. If both parents, it's about 90% of their children will have dyslexia. And it may range in severity between person to person, but it's usually there. And we've just seen, oh, that's a brain difference. So it's just different wiring in the brain. And people with dyslexia process language differently. And we just, again, saw that on that slide, these different areas, less efficient areas are activated versus someone who doesn't struggle because of dyslexia. Okay. So how many people are affected by this brain wiring difference? The research is telling us up to 20%. And if you think about that, in a classroom, 1 out of 5, if there were 20 students, 1 out of 5 would be struggling with reading, writing, and spelling due to dyslexia. And it does have a severity range. So some children will just be mildly impacted, some severely, some profoundly. If we think about a classroom of 30, we'll have 5 or 6 will have dyslexia. And again, it may look a little different from person to person because of that severity level. But it is common, it's not rare. Okay, let's go on. So what are the symptoms? And I think this is, just so profound that we have an idea of what are the symptoms of dyslexia. They start showing up really early. So we can find some symptoms as early as preschool. And what that would look like, most of these are related to language development. So a lot of kiddos with dyslexia will start speaking late, maybe not till 2, 2.5, 3. And they will mix up sounds in multisyllabic words. Biscotti, aminal, mazaging, Hengeberg. So they just can't keep those sounds in the right order. They may have an inability to rhyme by age 4. So normally this is already developed, but they struggle with that. And something that's kind of interesting about the immune system, they may have lots of allergies or stronger and more severe reactions to childhood illnesses than most other kids. They may have difficulty mastering tying shoes, so keeping that sequence in order. Confusion of left versus right. Lack of dominant-handedness. They may actually be ambidextrous, using both hands about the same amount. And they may have difficulty naming the letters of the alphabet or their sounds. They may have difficulty writing the alphabet in order. I know we're starting some of these skills as early as preschool. So again, these are things you can be watching. Or an unusual pencil grip. So if they are taught handwriting, they just may hold it differently. And I kind of look for this. So normally a good pencil grip is something like this. A lot of the kids will be, as they are taught, they may have different kinds of pencil grips. So that difficulty with handwriting can also come in there. Okay, let's go on. What about elementary school? What does that look like? So they may continue to struggle with the items that we just were looking at, in addition to some more difficulties coming in now once instruction has started. Difficulty with spelling. Most parents or teachers will tell me, oh, their spelling is just terrible, right? Letter or number reversals continuing past the end of first grade. A lot of teachers will think, oh, it's still okay, into second grade, into third. No, really, into first grade. If that's still happening, you definitely want to be paying attention to that. Why can't they remember the sequence of how to form that letter? Why is it continuing to be reversed? Again, they're not seeing it reversed, but their brain is processing that print differently. They may have extreme difficulty learning cursive, and I've also seen great difficulty learning printing. They often can't remember sight words or homonyms. They may have slow, choppy, inaccurate reading. So they can read a word on one page, they'll get to the next page, they have no clue what that word is. Okay. Trouble with math. A number of people with dyslexia can also struggle with math. So learning the facts, those rote random facts. I have a lot of older students that have never been able to memorize their multiplication facts or their division facts, even with all this flashcard practice. So getting rote random facts into memory, their phone numbers and so forth, can be really difficult. They may continue to struggle with left versus right. Take a left there. No, take a left. They're going right. Extremely messy desks, so having trouble organizing their space and their things. And by this time, especially later elementary school, they may dread going to school. When they go, they're being asked every single day to do the very hardest things, and they're not successful. And so you can get great resistance to going to school, some meltdowns, so forth. Dysgraphia just means trouble with writing. So again, that difficulty with handwriting. And as we mentioned before, this is an inherited condition. So they may have family members with dyslexia. They may have been diagnosed, but a lot of times family members have not been diagnosed. But you can go back into the family history and say, mom or dad struggled with reading and writing when they were growing up. Maybe they got support at school. Maybe it was diagnosed, maybe it wasn't, or maybe even a grandparent or a cousin. So you can look on both sides of the family and kind of research that history a little bit. And most likely it's there. People may not want to talk about it because it's a difficulty for people emotionally. But it's good to kind of go through that history a little bit. Okay, so that's the elementary years. Again, dyslexia, you don't outgrow it. So we will have continued symptoms into high school and adulthood. So in high school, most students have poor grades, and they may work harder and longer and not have a great effect at that. Other students, they can make fairly good grades, but looking at how hard and how long it takes them to finish work is sometimes an indicator, especially if they've had some of those difficulties that we mentioned earlier. And if you have dyslexia, so think about this, it's difficulty with processing language. If you have difficulty in your native language, that difficulty will follow you into learning a foreign language. It can be almost impossible to learn a foreign language. They might be able to pick up just the oral language, but then trying to learn to read and write another language, you're going to see very similar difficulties as you did in the native language. So what about adulthood? Okay, they may have to read things numerous times. So maybe kind of scan through it the first time and pick up a little bit, and they may have to read things 2 or 3 times to be able to get the gist of what's written down. They may have difficulty driving. So if you think about being able to read, if you're having to read at a 70, 80 mile an hour speed as you're driving down the road, that can make difficulty in that area of driving. They may turn the wrong direction, right, in what they were planning on doing. So many of the symptoms that we've already talked about will continue to follow the person through the lifespan. Now, most people have a lot of workarounds. They may choose not to read, or I don't like to read, I don't like to write. Again, these difficulties continue to follow them. And a number of people with dyslexia do go on to college, but they can find that they have to work a lot harder and it takes them longer to graduate. Writing things down is still very difficult. So they may get a tutor, they may get a peer helper. And fortunately, today we have much more technology that we'll be talking about. But again, just thinking about these overall symptoms that we've been talking about and how they can continue through the lifespan. What does it look like in a classroom? So being a classroom teacher, I was starting to pick up in second grade my students that weren't progressing, even though I was doing everything I could to help them. But I would see their difficulty with spelling. They would leave out sounds and words, leave out vowel sounds, get the vowel sounds mixed up. Their reading, again, was slow and choppy, and they misread words. When they came to a word they didn't already have memorized, they couldn't figure it out unless they used context. And then math, we've talked about some of those difficulties. So sequences in math can be challenging, keeping those in memory for some. Reading fluently, writing fluently. Talked about some of these difficulties. Yes, it's going to be hard to be fluent if you don't know the sound of symbols, if you can't remember how to write a letter. So that writing, written composition, getting your ideas down in print. If I could just tell you, right? I would be able to share what I know, but writing it down, takes me so long and it's so hard. These students will have strengths in the classroom, and you can watch for these as parents or teachers. If you give them a hands-on activity, they can do quite well. And in fact, they prefer the hands-on. They learn a lot through hands-on activities where they're not having to take in a lot of print or having to do a lot of writing. If they can tell you what they know, as in oral presentations, you're going to learn a lot about what they know, right? Versus asking them to do handwritten work. And they may also be very artistic. So a lot of, not everyone, so I don't want to classify all people with dyslexia having these strengths, but a lot of them will be very good at imagining things in 3D, being able to design things and structure things. Amazing strengths. I wish I had some of those. And then homework time. What could homework time look like? Well, you can imagine they've been struggling all day long in the classroom, just trying to keep up with the teacher and their peers, doing their best. So now I've got to come home and have homework time. So you may see meltdowns. They're exhausted. I don't want to do this anymore. Or I'll do that. Let's see, it's not due till next week. I'll do it on Saturday. Or you may have homework words. Mom and Dad, you've got to get this done. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm tired. I've got other things, right? Or maybe hide their homework. You can see all kinds of different things here. And as parents, you have to just look and say, really, what's going on here? You may think they have lack of motivation. Well, you probably would too if all day long you've been doing very, very difficult things that you know you really can't do, and still you're being forced to try. Again, losing assignments, so bummer. Now I can't do it. And then what about it just takes forever? So you've got a child that's working really hard and it's taking them hours with something you think should probably take maybe 30 minutes. Or they just can't do it without support. Again, they can study a lot. You know they've studied, and you get the results back from, end of unit test or spelling test, and poor results. So their really hard work at study really doesn't equate what comes out at the end there. So they may know it during the homework time and forget it during testing. So there really are a lot of things that you can be observing right at home. So what do I see at home? And talk with the teacher. If you're seeing things at home that are giving you red flags, ask the teacher, what do you see in the classroom? Right. Pay attention to reports, reading assessments that come home, or if you're getting spelling tests, what does that look like? Right. That's going to give you some red flags to say, maybe we should look at this a little more in depth. Maybe this isn't just my child not trying hard enough. Maybe it's not them being resistant. There's something else going on here. So when we begin to see these things, we don't want to wait. Again, children do not grow out of these symptoms. A lot of parents will think that if I wait long enough. I've even heard teachers say, well, just wait, they're just a slow bloomer. So just wait till the end of the year and things will pick up. And they don't. So trust your gut instinct. If you're sensing some of these things, be sure to start following up. Well, where can you start? What are 3 things you can start doing at home to support your child's reading growth? Number 1, if you're receiving homework, and I would say also projects. So I know not every school is giving homework these days, but often your child will have some homework, or there'll be assigned, I want you to have your child read for 30 minutes every night, right, to grow that reading skill. So here are some things you can do. For homework accommodations, you can begin using audiobooks, and this should be provided for all reading assignments. When we think about that, a lot of parents are like, well, that's kind of like cheating. I really want them to have a book in their hands and I want them to be reading. Well, if you can't read, that's going to make it difficult to take in the information. I always say it never helps to read wrong faster. So sometimes we get into this fluency work, but the kids really don't have those patterns down. So we don't want them reading wrong. That's building not good habits for learning. We don't want them reading wrong faster because they're not going to get the right information in. So audiobooks, I call them ear reading. And they're still going to grow their vocabulary. They're still going to grow their background knowledge. All of those are still really important things for children, no matter what age they are, teens also, to get the information at grade level that they need. The other thing you can do is read to your child. So same thing, they're going to get the background knowledge they need at their particular grade level. They're going to be learning new vocabulary, right? So getting it in this way is really important when this way isn't working too well. If a child brings home a test or an assignment, have them dictate their answers to you and you write it down. Act like the secretary. You're going to know a lot more about what they know and what they've learned than if you ask them to write it down and they can only write a few things. Number 2, you can screen your child. So look at the child's reading assessment data from the schools. And I know this just came out for a lot of our K-3 students in the Sahuarita School District. We're looking at what is their phonics knowledge like? Is it at grade level or below? And what about the phonemic awareness, the pre-phonics knowledge? How is their sound awareness? How are they processing language? Pay close attention to those scores. Also at home, you can check their sound to symbol knowledge. So we don't do this as much as we should. And I do provide assessments, and this is one area I check, and parents are shocked at the results. It's like, I thought my child knew those letters and those sounds. And come to find out, even teenagers, we think they know it, and they don't. No wonder they have a struggle with reading and spelling, right? So go ahead and have them write down A to Z, right? Just check, what does that look like when they try to write down the alphabet? Have them write it in lowercase letters. What does that look like? And then you do a sound to symbol check. say the letter A, ask them to tell you all the sounds they know that the letter A makes. Say the letter B and show them that letter. What's the name of this letter? Tell me the sound that letter makes. And then flip it. This time you're going to say the sound and you're going to ask them to write down the letter. So that you go through the entire alphabet. And I've also listed on this slide some digraphs and trigraphs. Those are 2 or 3 letters that make one new sound. Check those. We have some unit sounds that you can check both for reading and for spelling. Check all the short vowel sounds. These are K to 2nd grade, K to into 1st grade skills. So if there's some struggles here, we need to have someone go back and reteach those sound to symbols, both for reading and then flip it for spelling. So those are some things that you can do right away. And then let's look at the next screen. I've got one more idea here. Give phonemic awareness activities daily. So for young children especially, we want to skip right into phonics. And that's where we're matching the symbol to the sound, and we want to teach that right away. But what we as parents don't realize is before we start layering the phonics skills, we need to check their sound awareness, their language processing skills, their ability to hear and manipulate sounds within a 1-syllable word. It's what we do in our head before print ever comes into the picture. It is an essential pre-reading skill. And in fact, most kids with dyslexia that are struggling, this area is not developed. And in fact, a lot of people don't know this, but about 25% of the population, this skill does not develop on its own. Okay, there needs to be support for this to develop. And phonics won't work if you don't have phonemic awareness. That's an eye-opener for a whole lot of people right there. It's like, oh, well, what are you talking about? Let's go to the next slide. So phonemic awareness activities are kind of fun to do, actually, and you can do them right at home. And I have some pictures here, and then I've got a resource for you. If you look at those pictures, which picture begins with the sound of Okay, we might have a couple of them there. Which picture has the last sound of t? Did you say foot? Okay. Which 2 pictures start with the same sound? You probably said, well, moon and mouse, or foot and fox. So I don't have words up there for you to read, but I am asking you to process the sounds of those words, right? And that's what phonemic or sound awareness activities actually are. You are processing the first sound in a word, okay, the last sound in a word, okay, or even changing sounds like this. Say moon. Change the first sound to s. What word do you have now? Soon, right? Could you do these activities driving back and forth to school or going on vacation? Could you do them in the morning or the evening? Sure, you can, and they're kind of fun to do. I do have this free resource. It's readingrockets.org, and it's kind of a long address there, but you will want to go specifically to those and make sure that you're working with the phonemic, the sound awareness activities. And you'll get a really good idea early on, what is my child's skill like in this area, right? And we need to know that because it is the foundation for reading and spelling. And you can't skip it. If a child struggles in this area, they're going to struggle with reading and spelling. So it's a great area to check and to have some fun. Okay, then we also have assistive technology. So these are some additional supports you can give your child. And oh my goodness, what a blessing that we have today from 2003 when I started, you know, all the technology that we have today. We have text to speech, speech to text. We have something called the Echo Pen, that the person's hand, you see them writing with a pen that's actually recording what's being said so you can replay it. iPad apps, all kind of apps out there today. So definitely getting your child the support in these areas can be very, very helpful to process reading that has to take place, writing that has to take place in that school environment, or even in a work environment. If you're an adult and you're struggling with some of these, they can be so helpful. There's a free app on a lot of the just the regular computers called Narrator. That's an awesome one too, so you might want to check into that. But here's the thing, if your school is offering some technology, the thing you want to make sure of, and you can ask, the students need to be proficient with this technology, whatever it is that they're being asked to use, before being expected to use it for state or district testing. So we don't want to just hand students this and say, okay, go use it, but really they have to have the training to use it so they can be successful. Okay, so what works? What works for intervention for students who are struggling? There is a system called Orton-Gillingham-based programs. We're going to take a quick look at those if they're ready for it. So about 85% of students who are struggling with reading and spelling will be ready to use this type of instruction. It is a simultaneously multisensory approach to instruction. It is intense. It is instruction with ample practice. And the part I love about it is direct and explicit. So students are not left wondering, why does our language work this way? I don't get it. In fact, most people will say, why didn't anybody teach me with this before? I get it. Oh, this is great. So systematic and cumulative. You're using it both for reading and for spelling. You're looking at real words and nonsense words. You're working with reading and writing. So it just incorporates it all together because our language is both reading and writing. We do so much of that together, and that's how this is taught. Also, it's diagnostic teaching. So I'm going to test, or whoever's providing this should be assessing, did the student learn what they were expected to learn, and is it to mastery? Or is it just partial? If it's partial, I'm not moving on. I want this child to really have the foundation they need, right, or this individual, so that they can become literate. And it is a brain-based approach to providing instruction. Some of the systems out there, and there are more than what's listed here, but Slingerland is a classroom approach. Alphabetic Phonics is one, Project Read, Wilson, Language. The one I implement primarily is the Barton Reading and Spelling System. And if you're a homeschool-based parent, you'll be happy to know that that particular one was written for people that are homeschoolers that want to provide the instruction at home. So it's script-based, but has been very effective. I've been primarily using that one for about 20 years now, and very, very good success when it's followed with fidelity. Okay. So, for example, it teaches rules very explicitly. Do you know why we have two F's, L's, and S's at the end of words? People are like, is there a rule for that? There really is a rule. And in the Barton system and a couple other systems, they call it the floss rule. And here's the rule. If a word has only one vowel and ends in F, L, S, or Z, you double it. That's it. It's that simple. And again, we would look at those words in reading, and then of course we would apply that rule to spelling. So it's really very explicit teaching of our language and makes sense to most people. Okay, let's go on. And there are some professional groups that you may want to take a look at that do support individuals with dyslexia. The International Dyslexia Association, that's kind of where I started my journey. I'm a past president of the Oregon branch, served on their board for about 6 years. We do have an Arizona branch right here in Arizona that you can join. The Learning Disabilities Association, Decoding Dyslexia, they're an amazing group. They're one of the, with the International Dyslexia Association, have driven a lot of the legislation that's been passed in the country over the last 10, 15 years. And then the Reading League is kind of a new and upcoming organization that's also having a lot of good impact for this community. Okay. And this is one of my students. Love her to death. You know, again, thinking about, can a student overcome this? Well, they're not going to outgrow it, but given the right support, the right intervention, absolutely, they can become very proficient readers. They can go on to college. They can learn what they want to learn. But it is that you have to pay attention. You have to start working as early as you can, right? And then move forward with that learning. So my oldest student was 71, and he also learned to read much more proficiently. So I like to leave this with, you're never too late. It's never too late to begin, but you need to start now. You don't want to let things continue until someone is really failing. And you can see in this little slide all the different areas of strengths that people with dyslexia can actually have. So we absolutely want to support this population. And I absolutely hope that I've helped you as parents and teachers. Maybe you've learned a little bit more today about dyslexia. I think let's open this up for a few questions, and then I'll talk about that book that you were mentioning too. And I'm just going to turn off my timer here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a few questions from people that I talked to previously, and one of them wasn't able to join. So if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and ask. I have like about 4, but I'll try to keep it short. One of them, I think I had mentioned it to you before, was if the parents are homeschooling, how do they get evaluated? How do they actually, know officially if their kiddo has dyslexia?
So there are a couple different routes that you can go. One of the things I do, besides the tutoring, is I do assessments for dyslexia. So you can start with a screener. I'm not qualified to provide that formal diagnosis, although I pretty much know it when I see it. But I can provide an in-depth screening, and that can let you know, ooh, do I need to take that next step and go see the person who could provide the diagnosis, or you could start with the person that can provide the diagnosis. So you would want to see a neuropsychologist or an educational psychologist. And I would caution you, make sure you do some ask questions. Not every one of those people are really familiar with dyslexia. So you want someone who has a very good background in looking at dyslexia. And understanding what the areas of strengths and the areas of weaknesses are. A lot of the schools will provide, when we think about IEPs and different kinds of programs that schools provide, they're not providing a diagnosis for dyslexia. In the school system, they're looking to see, is this student 2 years or more behind their peers and struggling in such a way that it's really impacting their academic learning. If they are, then they will provide them with an IEP, an individualized education plan. So there is a difference with the school versus what you're going to get outside the school system.
Okay, that's really good to know. When a parent would want to get a screener, is that something that you have to do in person, or are there virtual screeners that parents can, go through? And that basically tells them that your child is highly likely to have dyslexia, and then if they want, they can then go to a neuropsychologist after.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's a good question. There are some screeners on the web, and I'm not going to recommend necessarily any particular one. You can find some. I do provide this type of screening, so you are able to get a screening from a distance with some providers. I'm doing that still from here back to Washington State, and working with a clinician there that provides a diagnosis and is licensed in Oregon and Washington. I know there's a few agencies in Tucson that do the dyslexia testing, and it's usually a wait when you get into these agencies because they're full. So just know that you'll probably have a wait working with them.
All right, that's super helpful. Okay, you did kind of touch on this before. I had somebody ask, like, how old do I know if my kid actually has dyslexia? Should I just, wait? That question kind of comes up a lot. And you did mention preschool. And that is if they've already received some instruction in, phonemic awareness or phonograms. And at that point, do you feel like telling a parent that, if they're preschool or kindergarten and they just can't get their letter sounds at that point, would you advise parents to, maybe do a screen or something like that? You did kind of mention it, but I do know that some parents are curious, like, do I just have to wait a little bit, or, when do I get it checked out?
So you can certainly test the phonemic awareness area. And there is a standardized test. It's quite reliable. I've been using it for a number of years. That screening starts as early as age 4.5. So we're not talking about phonics instruction, right? We're talking about that sound awareness. What does that look like? If you're hearing your child mix up the sounds and words, they're having some speech difficulties, I would say the sooner that you step in and start getting some early assessments, the better. You're going to have a baseline there. And then you're going to know right away, oh, we need to do something probably more than the standard for my child. So that, by second grade, they're at second grade level. They're not 2 years behind. So a lot of parents will wait. I see parents wait until 4th and 5th grade. And by that time, often the struggle is quite real and emotional. So the earlier you can get started on things, if you suspect dyslexia, if there's, those kinds of problems in the family, the better for your child.
That is so good to know. I used to teach. I wish I had known this stuff more when I was in the classroom. And I had there is a quick question from the audience. I want to make sure that I get to that. Where could that type of assessment be found? So I know I'm assuming this means like the assessment for maybe the 4.5-year-old, like at the younger age. Where is that sound awareness? Can they find it online? Do they have to go in person? Where can they find that kind of assessment to try to do that early catching?
You might be able to find a screener, I'm not 100% on this, by looking up Reading Rockets. There's a lot of support there on that particular website. You can go to the International Dyslexia Association. Here locally, I can provide that early screening for you and provide maybe some resources from there. If you're seeing a lot of speech language difficulties, you could see a speech language pathologist and see if they might be able to help you also. And then there's a couple of dyslexia centers in Tucson. You could give them a call and check to see, what that price point looks like, what their timeline looks like, and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And what we can do too is I'm going to post this recording, so I can also post some links as well. And yeah, thank you. If you guys are in the Green Valley, Sahuarita, South Tucson area, Cheryl is local, and so that's a great resource if you live in that area. But we can also post some links as well for people to look at. Okay, I'll try to wrap up with I think one last question. Is there anything when you are thinking about home educators and they're trying to figure their way through, does my kid have dyslexia? What can I do? In terms of, you mentioned some of the curriculum that they could use. What would you think would be the most homeschool friendly out of, you listed a lot of different names like alphabet phonics or something like that. Would you recommend the Barton reading and spelling? What would you recommend in terms of if you're teaching your kiddo at home, what would be the best maybe start for a home educator to use?
I think if you are using your current curriculum, whatever that choice is that you made, and it's not working, do those simple screenings that I discussed, the A to Z, both for reading and for writing. Look at their handwriting. If you're seeing symptoms of dyslexia, certainly you can contact me. I'd be happy to even just discuss this with you. Um, and then you can start looking at the Reading Rockets. That's, again, a very good resource. The Florida Center for Reading, I'm trying to remember the name of it, Reading Research, you can check there. And then if you want a program that really is geared towards supportive parents and looking at, can I provide this intervention at home? One really good program is the Barton Reading and Spelling System. It starts from the foundation and continues through pretty sophisticated reading. So it's something you could use that is scripted. You could also reach out to the International Dyslexia Association and see what other programs they might recommend for work at home.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I was wondering if you could end telling us a little bit about what you've been creating on with your books that you've been doing, and tell us just a little bit about that as we wrap up as a resource for kiddos and parents.
Thank you so much. So I partnered with an author here in our area, and we've created Reading is Fun books. And these books are very much geared towards children who are beginning readers or children who have dyslexia and are beginning their intervention in reading and spelling. And these books are called decodable books. I wish I had one here to hold up, but look up Reading is Fun books. You will find us there. And, you know, a lot of times we are handing children books with a lot of reading patterns that they actually cannot read because they haven't either been taught those particular reading patterns, or they may have been taught them, but it didn't stick. And so these are very targeted letter patterns. And on page 2 of every book, it tells you exactly which letter patterns and which sight words. There's a few sight words in these books that students need so that then they can read with 90 to 95% to 100% accuracy. And I can tell you, students who haven't been able to read, now they're getting some intervention and they get these wonderful illustrated books that they can read. Reading starts to become fun for them and they realize it's not impossible and they're on their way to success. And that's why we've created them. We know that it's a great need in our communities and in our schools. And so we've written about 11 books. We're getting ready to put one more out here probably this next month, and we will continue working on those, getting those out for our students. We know children can learn to read if they're given the right approach and at their pace, and we've seen it over and over.
That's wonderful. And you definitely have to give me a link to those books because I'm going to post it with this. They sound really great. And having them experience a little bit of success in reading, I'm sure just is amazing for them to be able to actually read a book and not feel completely overwhelmed. Well, you gave us so much information. I'm so glad that we recorded this. I filled up 2 pages worth of notes. So thank you so much for your expertise and knowledge. And we have this is perfect timing. We hit our time. It couldn't have been more perfect in a timing. I'd like to say we planned that every single slide out, but it ended up working like that. So thank you so much if you joined us, and we'll have another series of people coming. The next webinar is going to be really talking about speech and myofunctional therapies, something that I didn't really know very much about. So you can just hop on Circle and you can get on there. But thank you so much, Cheryl. We appreciate you. And I will post this with some links. And there was one question that I really want to get to. Is that okay if I have one last question?
Sure.
Somebody was wondering, does ADHD and dyslexia overlap?
That's a very good question. I'm glad it was brought up. Okay. So what we found is dyslexia usually doesn't come by itself. So we talked about the handwriting difficulty. About 40% of individuals with dyslexia also have some sort of ADHD, we call it these days. So knowing for sure if a child has that or not, I call it finding everything you can about your child's learning profile. What do what are all the parameters that I need to support, and just knowing that and taking steps forward if you suspect that will give you more guidance in knowing how to support their learning. Great
So
question.
about 40%, sometimes it can, you can see overlaps in other things.
Right, right.
That's really good to know. So it sounds like just doing a whole screener sounds like a really good idea.
It is a good idea, yeah, if you're wondering about dyslexia.
Yeah, and do the screeners just look for dyslexia, or do they also can find things like ADHD, or is that a separate assessment that you need to
That
do?
is a separate diagnosis and assessment, but often the clinicians will pair that particular assessment. You know, as you're going through this process of learning about dyslexia, you can ask, can you also assess for ADHD? And many of them will be able to.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that you took that last question. I saw it, I
Yeah,
was like, oh, I didn't make sure I ask it.
great.
So I'm going to go ahead and sign off, but thank you so much, Cheryl. We appreciate you, and thank you for your wisdom in this area.
Best wishes.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.